May 1968, the uprisings. In the spring of 1968, Paris did not shout. It hummed. There were no grand fanfares or marching banners at first, just a restlessness under the surface, like a city trying to catch its breath. The boulevards glowed in soft April light. Cafes brimmed with students hunched over notebooks. Lecture halls were full, but minds often wandered. Something was stirring beneath the elegance of post-war prosperity. France was entering les 30 glorieuses, the 30 glorious years of economic boom. Industry, modernity, and prosperity were touted as national achievements. Skyscraper-like new buildings sprouted in cities. The Renault factories churned out cars. Televisions proliferated in middle-class living rooms. On paper, things were going well. But many young people, especially university students, felt they were living in a gilded frame that didn't reflect the picture they wanted to paint. At the University of Nanterre, on the outskirts of Paris, students became restless with outdated curricula, authoritarian professors, and a system that left them feeling like shadows rather than society's future. It began with something as small as a cigarette. A female student lit one in a male-only dorm, an act interpreted by administrators as rebellion. The student was reprimanded. Others rallied. Soon, buildings were occupied. Demonstrations formed. A student leader with fiery energy, Daniel Cohn-Bendit, nicknamed Danny LaRouge, galvanized the group. He didn't shout slogans so much as ask them questions. Why accept stale ideas? Where were their rights? His questions echoed beyond Nanterre's gates. By late April, the movement escalated. Students marched from Nanterre to Sorbonne, the historic heart of Paris's academic and intellectual life. The administration panicked and began shutting parts of the university. In response, the students barricaded themselves in. The campus became a fortress of idealism and tension. Then came May 6th, when the students tried to demonstrate and the police intervened with force. Tear gas flew. Students and police clashed in front of the Sorbonne's ancient entrance. The crowd scattered, but the spark had caught. What started as dispersed discontent became a confrontation. Idealism against power, youth against structure. 4 nights later, on May 10th, came the night of the barricades. The Latin Quarter, with its narrow streets and ancient architecture, transformed overnight. Students and sympathetic Parisians built barricades, upturned cars, bicycles, chairs, paving stones, anything that could slow down the armored vehicles. Flames flickered there, lighting faces shining with conviction. In iconic moments, citizens passed water to gasping students. Journalists captured images of barricades formed by ordinary people, iconic images later printed in newspapers around the world. That night, the barricades held. In many places, police retreated. The city held its breath. But the movement was not limited to students. It swiftly moved into factories, offices, and public transit. By May 13th, over 10 million workers, nearly 2/3 of the French workforce, had joined a massive general strike. Factories stood silent. Metro trains halted. Shops closed. The country grinded to a halt. Union leaders, intellectuals, and worker delegates met in improvised assemblies. Agreements were drafted. On May 25th, the government negotiated the Grenelle agreements with union leaders. Wages would be raised by up to 35% in some sectors. Working hours would be reduced. Union representation and rights were expanded dramatically. It looked like victory, until President Charles de Gaulle took to television on May 30th. He portrayed the movement as a threat to society, calling for new parliamentary elections in June and reasserting his authority. The message was clear: You're heard now, but order must be restored. By early June, universities reopened, factories resumed operations, and life began to return. But the country had changed, because what had begun with protests over lecture halls had become a seismic social upheaval. Gender norms were challenged. Women spoke of equal pay, sexual liberation, and the right to self-determination. Feminism gained momentum, and the public conversation shifted. Art and cinema broke boundaries. Directors like Jean-Luc Godard, Agnès Varda, and others captured the spirit of rebellion. In their films and writings, ideology, absurdity, and desire collided. Education underwent reform. Universities became more flexible, interdisciplinary, and open to student participation. The authoritarian professor was replaced by dialogues, debates, and collaborative learning. Political culture diversified. A new left movement, environmental concern, anti-colonial thought, and libertarian philosophies gained shape. Ideas once confined to intellectual salons appeared in protests and pamphlets and later in local politics. Across Europe, and indeed globally, May 1968 became a spark. The US anti-Vietnam protests, feminist marches in Germany, student uprisings in Mexico City, they all took inspiration from Paris's Summer of Defiance. The streets of Paris, the ones once dotted with barricades, returned to a semblance of normal. But that sense of rebellion had seeped into the culture. Cafes remained lively forums of debate. Posters still lined neighborhood walls. Young people carried the dream that authority could be challenged, not with guns or bombs, but with conviction, ideas, unity. By then, the movement was no longer about strikes or police. It was about a generation that redefined freedom. In schools, in families, in intimate relationships. The movement did not topple a government, but it liberated minds. 3 years later, in 1971, the poet Jacques Prévert wrote that if all revolutions had been as peaceful as May 1968, the world would have changed more often. And perhaps he was right. They had wielded no heavy arms, just words, passion, and presence. May 1968 didn't end. It evolved into films, songs, laws, and lingering ideals. It reminded the world. True change begins when people refuse complacency, speak with one another, and imagine differently. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and follow for more untold tales from history. Trust me, what's coming next will surprise you even more.